Okay, hi guys. So today we're going to be looking at common foreign and security policy. So the European Defence Community is the first thing we're going to look at. So this plan proposed the creation of a European army with the eventual involvement of German units to be placed under a single military and political European authority. This proposal sparked fierce debate, particularly in France. Although it was accepted by most Western countries, the plan for a European defence community was rejected by the French National Assembly in August 1954. The refusal of the French National Assembly to ratify the treaty establishing the European Defence Community automatically led to the plan for a European political community, of which was the institutional corollary being abandoned. So the next is the Western European Union. So with lessons learned from the European Defence Community's failure, Britain put forth an idea on integrating Germany into the Western European security system. So this occurred in the 1954 Paris Conference, where Britain suggested that they expand 1948 Brussels Treaty by including Italy and Germany and together establish a Western European Union for a European-only type of security action. Its main aim was to integrate Germany into the West European security framework. So when Germany became a NATO member in 1955, the West European Union's task was accomplished and the West European Union became useless under the dominance of NATO. So in other words, the US leadership in NATO, the Western European Union had no reason to play an independent role, and therefore NATO was the principal mechanism of security and defense in Europe. Okay, so next thing we'll look at the Fouchet plan. So there's going to be a few slides. I'm just going to skip through because there's not much for me to explain. You guys can just read through. So this is one. So then this talks about the European political cooperation, that European defense identity. This is just a whole lot of different things that occurred in terms of Europe and the security forces that they used and how countries were roped. Then with the end of the Cold War, so with the collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War, European security and defense faced a major turning point and triggered the development of a new dimension and in the EU and EC security and defense. So it was agreed that the European security needed a new dimension that should evolve independently from the USA. Okay, so now this is important. So the outbreak of the Gulf crisis, right? So the Persian Gulf War, which is also called the Gulf War, was an international conflict that was triggered by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait on August 2nd, 1990. So Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, ordered the invasion and occupation of Kuwait with the apparent aim of acquiring the nation's large oil reserves, cancelling a large debt Iraq owed Kuwait, and expanding Iraqi power in the region. It was the first major international crisis of the post-Cold War era, and the US-led response would set important precedents for the use of military force over subsequent decades. The diplomatic response to the invasion was swift. So on the 6th of August, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 661, which imposed a ban on all trade with Iraq and called on UN member countries to protect the assets of the legitimate government of Kuwait. A day later, the first US troops were sent to Saudi Arabia, while Mubarak invited Arab leaders to Cairo for an emergency summit. So, this talks about the Atlanticist Europeanist divides and how they were divided based on how certain countries fall into this category. So now we're going to look at the Bosnian War, right? So this was an ethnically rooted war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Please my words. So that was a former republic of Yugoslavia with a multi-ethnic population comprising of Bosniaks, which are Bosnian Muslims, Serbs, and Croats. So after years of bitter fighting that involved the three Bosnian groups as well as the Yugoslav army, Western countries with backing from NATO imposed a final ceasefire negotiated by Dayton, Ohio, US in 1955. So several peace proposals during the war failed, largely because the Bosnian Serbs, who controlled about 70% of the land by 1940, refused to concede any territory. So in 1944, in NATO's first ever use of force, its fighters shot down 4 Bosnian Serb aircrafts that were violating the UN-imposed no-fly zone over the country. Later that year, at the UN's request, NATO launched isolated and ineffective airstrikes against Bosnian Serb targets following the Srebrenica massacre and another Bosnian Serb attack on a Sarajevo marketplace. So NATO undertook more concentrated airstrikes late in 1955. Combined with a large-scale Bosnian Croat land offensive, this action led to Bosnian Serb forces to agree to US-sponsored peace talks in Dayton in November. So the resulting Dayton Accords called for a federalized Bosnia and Herzegovina, in which 51% of the land would constitute a Croat Bosnia Federation and 49% a Serb Republic. Should force the agreement formally signed in December 1955. Okay, so the Declaration of St. Petersburg is the first formal agreement prohibiting the use of certain weapons in war. It had its origin in the invention in 1863 by Russian military authorities of a bullet which exploded on contact with a hard substance and whose primary object was to blow up ammunition wagons. So in 1867, the projectile was so modified as to explode on contact with a soft substance. As such, the bullet would have been an inhumane instrument of war. The Russian government, unwilling to use the bullet itself or to allow another country to take advantage of it, suggested that the use of the bullet be prohibited by international agreement. So the declaration to that effect adopted in 1868, which has the force of law, confirms the customary rule according to which the use of arms, projectiles, and material of nature to cause unnecessary suffering is prohibited. So this rule was later on laid down in Article 23 of the Hague Regulations on Land Warfare in 1899 and 1907. So the Declaration of St. Petersburg prompted the adoption of further declarations of a similar nature at two Hague peace conferences in 1899 and 1907. So the Hague Declarations relating to the discharge of projectiles and explosives from balloons and the use of asphyxiating gases and the use of expanding bullets refer in their preamble to the Declaration of St. Petersburg. The next few slides you guys can read through. This talks about common foreign and security policy. Then you're looking at the intergovernmental pillar of CFS. Then you're looking at the document on associate membership. And then we're looking at the development of the European security and defense identity, right? So the identity within the alliance is designed to strengthen European participation in security matters while reinforcing transatlantic cooperation, right? So the ESDI is being developed in the context of complementary initiatives being undertaken by other mutually reinforcing institutions such as the Western European Union. So NATO and the Western European Union are developing close links through joint meetings and exercises and regular consultations. Cooperation between NATO and Western European councils facilitates the implementation of a combined joint task force concept, developed to respond to the need for easily deployable multinational, multi-service military formations. So the combined joint task force operates within NATO and could be used for operations led by the Western European Union. This task force provides the command and control arrangements needed to allow military forces to operate effectively by creating integrated headquarters composed of military elements suited to the task to be undertaken. Their military tasks include humanitarian relief, peacekeeping, and peace enforcement, as well as collective defense. Then we're going to look at the next thing, which is the Treaty of Amsterdam, right? So you guys can read through the Treaty of Amsterdam. It's quite explained, and then you have your St. Malo Declaration, a few slides reading what the declaration is about. Then we have decoupling, duplication, and discrimination. So this as well you guys can read through. So it talks about how NATO is the expression of the link of indispensable transatlantic link. It should remain an organization of sovereign allies, right? Then you have the Burnham Plus arrangements. There's just a whole lot of agreements and arrangements that exist that you guys need to read through. Then you have your headline goal, right? So in December 1999, the European Council meeting in Helsinki marked a headline goal to achieve the deployment of an army for EU-led missions in situations of international crisis. So it was agreed that cooperating voluntarily in EU-led operations, member states must be able to by 2008 to deploy within 60 days and sustain for at least 1 year military forces of up to 50,000, 60,000 persons capable of the full range of the Petersburg task, which we spoke about previously. Afghanistan war. So we all know that Taliban is a Sunni Islamic fundamentalist and predominantly Pashtun movement control most of Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. So in 2001, US and allied forces invaded the country and quickly ousted the Taliban regime following its refusal to hand over terrorist leader Osama bin Laden in the wake of Al-Qaeda's 9/11 attacks. Following the US-led invasion, Taliban leadership relocated to southern Afghanistan and across the border to Pakistan, from where they waged an insurgency against the Western-backed government in Kabul, Afghan National Security Forces and international coalition troops. When the US-led coalition formally ended its combat mission in 2014, the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces were put in charge of Afghanistan security, which we just spoke about. However, the forces face significant challenges in holding territory and defending population centers. The Taliban continued to attack rural districts and carry out suicide attacks in major cities, with the ANDSF suffering heavy casualties. The war largely remained a stalemate for nearly 6 years despite a small US troop increase in 2017. Continuing combat missions and a shift of US military strategy to target the Taliban revenue sources, which involved airstrikes against drug labs and opium production sites. The Taliban briefly seized the capital of Farah province in May 2018, and in August 2018, it captured the capital of Ghazni province, holding the city for nearly a week before US and Afghan troops regained control. So in February 2020, after more than a year of direct negotiations, the US government and Taliban signed a peace deal. So this was called the Doha Agreement, right? So we spoke about the peace deal that they reached, right? That set a timeline for the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. Under the agreement, the United States pledged to draw down US troops to approximately 8,500 within 135 days and complete a full withdrawal within 14 months. In return, Taliban pledged to prevent territory under its control from being used by terrorist groups and to enter negotiations with the Afghan government. However, no official ceasefire was put in place. After a brief reduction in violence, the Taliban quickly resumed attacks on Afghan security forces and civilians. Direct talk between the Afghan government and Taliban began months after the agreement upon the start of March 2020. However, the negotiations faced multiple delays and ultimately made little progress. Violence across Afghanistan continued in 2020 and 2021 as the US increased airstrikes and raids targeting the Taliban. The Taliban in turn attacked Afghan government and ANDSF targets and made significant territorial gains. Civilian casualties across Afghanistan have remained high over the past several years. The United Nations documented a then record high of 10,993 civilian casualties in 2018, although 2019 saw a slight decline. Civilian deaths and injuries exceeded 10,000 for the sixth year in a row, bringing the total UN documented civilian casualties from 2009 to 2020 to more than 100,000, despite another slight decline. That year, the first half of 2020 saw a record high number of civilian casualties as the Taliban ramped up their military offense amid the withdrawal of international troops. In addition to the Taliban's offensive forces, Afghanistan faces a threat from the Islamic State of Khorasan, which is ISIS, which has also expanded its presence to several eastern provinces, increased activity in Kabul, and targeted civilians with suicide attacks. Okay, this looks at the first military operation. Then you have the operation in Bosnia Herzegovina, very hard word to say. The new Artemis operation. Okay, so when we look at the Artemis operation, it was carried out in the Democratic Republic of Congo from June to September 2003 on the request of the United Nations, and was the first European Union, and this was the European Union's first independently launched military operation and its first operation in Africa. France, supported by Britain, was the driving political framework to secure EU's engagement as well as the main military contributor to the operation. Looking at the US invasion of Iraq in March 2003, right? So the Iraq War, also called the Second Persian Gulf War from 2003 to 2011, was a conflict in Iraq that consisted of two phases. So the first phase of these was a brief, conventionally fought war in March to April 2003, in which a combined force of troops from the United States and Great Britain, with smaller contingents from several other countries, invaded Iraq and rapidly defeated Iraqi military and paramilitary forces. It was followed by a longer second phase in which a US-led occupation of Iraq was opposed by an insurgency. After violence began to decline in 2007, the United States gradually reduced its military presence in Iraq, formally completing its withdrawal in December 2011. American military casualties in the conflict included some 4,500 service members killed and some 32,000 others wounded. So Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990 ended in Iraq's defeat by a US-led coalition in the Persian Gulf War, which was what we spoke about initially, right? So 1990 to 1991. However, the Iraqi branch of the I can't say these words, Ba'ath Party, headed by Saddam Hussein, managed to retain power by harshly suppressing uprisings of the country's minority Kurds and its majority Shia Arabs. To stem the exodus of Kurds from Iraq, the Allies established a safe haven in northern Iraq's predominantly Kurdish regions. Allied warplanes patrolled no-fly zones in northern and southern Iraq that were off limits to Iraqi aircraft. Moreover, to restrain future Iraqi aggression, the UN implemented economic sanctions against Iraq in order to, among other things, hinder the progress of its most lethal arms programs, including those for development of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, right? So UN inspections during the mid-1990s uncovered a variety of proscribed weapons and prohibited technology throughout Iraq. So I know there was a motion previously, like a few years ago, that was I think it was this house would recognize an independent Kurdish state, so that's where information like this would come in handy. Then we're going to add old Europe versus new Europe. So in reaction to France and Germany, the US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said that the United States could ignore old Europe because new Europe was on their side. Furthermore, France, Germany, and Belgium vetoed Turkey's invocation of NATO's Article 4 and requesting aid in case of an imminent attack from Iraq. 3 declined Turkey's request as a sign of their displeasure with US foreign policy. Then you have this talking about the divisions over Turkey. You guys can read through this. Okay, then we're looking at the European security strategy, right? So you guys can also do this. Then you have your headline going for your European Defence Agency, right? So the agency is a European Defence Cooperation hub. Its expertise and network enable it to cover a broad defence spectrum, including harmonizing requirements to delivering operational capabilities, research and innovation, to developing technology demonstrators, training and exercises, to maintenance, to support in common defence and security policy operations, right? Then you have the Treaty of Lisbon, right? So the Treaty of Lisbon, also known as the Lisbon Treaty, updated regulations for the European Union, establishing a more centralized leadership in foreign policy, a proper process for countries that wish to leave the Union, and a streamlined process for enacting new policy. So the Lisbon Treaty updated European Union regulations, establishing more centralized leadership in foreign policy, a process for countries that want to leave the EU, and it's I just said this right. Sorry. So the treaty was built on existing treaties but adopted new rules to enhance cohesion and streamline actions within the EU. The Lisbon Treaty also replaced the previously rejected Constitutional Treaty, which attempted to establish a union constitution. Those who supported the Lisbon Treaty argued that it enhanced accountability by providing a better system of checks and balances, and that it gave more power to the European Parliament, which held major influence in the Union's legislative branch. Major critics of the Lisbon Treaty argued that it pulled influence towards the centre, forming an unequal distribution of power that ignored the needs of smaller countries. Then we're looking at the Russia-Georgia War. You guys can read through this. Then you have the European neighborhood policy. So as Europe faced new security threats, this situation led to Europeans to find new tools such as the European neighborhood policy in order to cope with the challenges that were mentioned in the strategy document. Its objectives included to bring economic and security benefits to countries in the periphery of the European Union without a membership perspective. Thus, it meant that the European Union relied upon its economic power to pursue its interests concerning security issues. The ENP constitutes an important tool for common foreign and security policy of the EU in providing stability and security to Europe. Okay, then the next few slides goes through each individual country and what they classify as, a few details about them that I think would be very important, and as well as like the specific treaties and documents and policies they used. Okay, so contrary to the United Kingdom, France has been the strongest supporter of the creation of an independent European security and defense initiative. France has traditionally been in the Europeanist camp and favored multilateralism. Wow, I said that so incorrectly. With the aim of curbing out the United States hegemony, has always sought to develop power as a superpower where France takes the lead along with other European member states, right? Next one, we're looking at Germany. You have another one. Germany, you have Korea, you have withdrawal of the US from Europe, and then you have the EU's military capacity. You guys can read. It's just going to be me reading the slides. I'm just not going to do it. You guys can read through these.